1, now.
In April of 2003, British Airways and Air France made a joint announcement. After nearly 30 years in service, they were retiring Concorde.
It's farewell to Concorde today and the end of almost 3 decades of supersonic passenger travel.
The fastest passenger aircraft the world had ever built. Their conclusion was rather simple. The economics to make Concorde work simply didn't exist, and the sonic boom emitted from this aircraft was simply too much to handle. And by all logic, that should have been the end of the story. But in January of last year, a demonstrator aircraft took off in the Mojave Desert, climbed to 35,000 feet, and did something no startup in aviation history had ever done.
There we are. XB-1 is supersonic, faster than the speed of sound.
It broke the sound barrier. This isn't some random startup gambling on hype. In fact, Boom has locked in pre-orders from United, American, and even Japan Airlines, and more surprisingly, it's now building its own engine after Rolls-Royce walked away from the entire project. But here is the question. How can a startup that's barely 5 years old build a supersonic engine when a century-old manufacturer like Rolls-Royce walked away? Well, the answer is so surprising that it will change the entire dynamics of how these new supersonic engines are gonna be built. But Boom isn't the only company that is building a supersonic aircraft right now. Roughly 2,000 miles away in a hangar in California, NASA has just rolled out one of the strangest aircraft it has ever built. An aircraft everyone said was impossible. A supersonic jet without the explosive sonic boom. So how is NASA building a supersonic jet with no boom? And how is a startup barely 5 years old building a supersonic engine from scratch, and that too with a fraction of the money? This is the story of NASA versus Boom, a race to build the supersonic jet of the 21st century. Before we get into the 21st century supersonic race, let's understand why it failed the first time. Because NASA and Boom are picking up exactly where it left off. Following the Second World War, the aviation industry underwent one of the most explosive decades of transformation in its history, moving from propeller engines to the jet age in a span of just a few short years. But the appetite for speed showed no sign of slowing down. By the 1960s, while the Beatles were conquering the airwaves and the world's two superpowers were racing each other to the moon, a rather different kind of space race was heating up right here in our own atmosphere. A race to build the world's first supersonic airliner. The answer was Concorde.
An Air France Concorde from Paris and a British Airways Concorde from London took off today, minutes apart, on the first commercial flight of the supersonic jets to the United States.
A plane that could get you from New York to London in 3.5 hours, at an altitude high enough that you could see the curve of the Earth through the window, all while the cabin crew poured champagne. But Concorde was never really about speed alone. It was about who was on board. The passenger list read like a Rolodex of investment bankers, diplomats, and the occasional Rolling Stone, most of them flying it often enough to recognize each other across the aisle. That was the entire business model. Concorde never needed to fill 400 seats. It just needed around 100 people willing to pay a fare that cost more than most cars. And yet, the model failed. In April of 2003, British Airways and Air France jointly announced Concorde's retirement after nearly 30 years of service. And while the downfall initially seemed like the fallout from the Air France crash 3 years earlier, the real reason came down to two things. And the first one was too loud to ignore. You see, as an aircraft moves through the air, it pushes air out of its path, creating pressure waves in the front and back of the airframe. And when it flies faster than the speed of sound, those air molecules can no longer move out of the way in time, so they compress together and form a wave, a bit like the wake trailing behind a very fast boat. And when those pressure waves reach our ears, our brains process them as an enormous boom. So, after a sustained public outcry, the United States banned overland supersonic flight for civil aircraft in 1973, and soon other countries followed with restrictions of their own. Which is why Concorde was only ever permitted to go supersonic over water, cutting off almost every profitable route it might otherwise have flown.
While the sonic boom was hurting people, it was also creating efficiency problems for the airlines running the operation. And the easiest way to see them is with an example.
Let's compare Concorde to one of the most common planes flying today, the Boeing 787. Now, this, of course, varies on route, weight, and a lot of other factors, but as a fairly high estimate, it burns around 1,600 imperial gallons of fuel per hour. But Concorde, on the other hand, used a massive 5,600 imperial gallons, and that too while carrying significantly fewer passengers. To make matters worse, the plane required up to 57 hours of maintenance for every single hour it spent in the air, which meant the economics simply weren't there.
This is where the new players enter the picture, and leading the race is a startup called Boom.
Boom Supersonic was founded by Blake Scholl, a former Amazon software engineer who later co-founded the mobile startup Kima Labs. Then one day, Blake saw Concorde in a museum and started thinking about the void it had left behind, and what it might mean for the world if supersonic flights were to come back. So he approached Y Combinator, the startup accelerator that backed companies like Airbnb and Dropbox, with an audacious pitch. Build a supersonic airliner that could operate profitably at business class fares rather than first class premiums, and make speed accessible to millions rather than thousands. Remarkably, the pitch worked. By 2022, Japan Airlines had invested $10 million and pre-ordered 20 aircraft. United Airlines signed agreements for 15 overtures with options on 35 more, and American Airlines followed with deposits on 20 aircraft and options on a further 40. In fact, in January of last year, Boom's XB-1 demonstrator aircraft broke the sound barrier for the first time when Chief Test Pilot Tristan Brandenburg flew it out of the Mojave Air and Spaceport.
There we are. XB-1 is supersonic, faster than the speed of sound.
While that was a genuine milestone, it's worth being clear about what XB-1 actually was: a 1/3 scale demonstrator. And scaling that up into a full-size airliner meant running head-first into a completely new set of aerodynamic and structural problems. And that is exactly what happened. You see, XB-1 flew on an ogival delta wing, the same curved platform Concorde used, and the same one Boom originally drew for Overture back when it was still a concept. While that design is excellent for high-speed supersonic flight, it isn't very efficient when flying at the lower speeds required for takeoff and landing. So in order to generate enough lift on approach, Concorde had to fly at such a high angle of attack that the pilots simply could not see the runway. That is why Concorde had its famous droop nose, which hinged downward to restore visibility. An elegant solution, but one that added real complexity and real weight. Rather than fit something similar to Overture, Boom's engineers went with an augmented vision system, first flown on XB-1 as the Forward-Looking Vision System, or FLVS. It uses 2 redundant cameras, a multifunction display, a data acquisition system, and an inertial navigation system, together giving pilots everything they need to fly a safe approach without ever seeing over the nose. The wing problem was dealt with separately. In July 2022, after 51 full design iterations and 5 rounds of wind tunnel testing, Boom abandoned the ogival delta design on Overture entirely and replaced it with a swept contoured gull wing, with blunted tips, a conventional tailplane, and 4 engines instead of 3. Boom claims the new configuration is now 20% more efficient than the design it replaced. While things seemed to go well, then came the shocker boom was not expecting. In September 2022, Rolls-Royce, which had spent 3 years studying the propulsion system for Overture, publicly walked away from the program, stating that commercial supersonic aviation was not currently a priority for the company. And honestly, you can see why. Rolls-Royce was already deep in the Trent 1000 durability crisis.
Rolls-Royce Holdings says it's expecting a sharp rise in the number of Dreamliners being grounded because of faults with the engine maker's Trent 1000 turbine.
And developing a clean sheet supersonic engine would have meant billions in investment and a certification process measured in years. And no engine manufacturer was going to justify that outlay for a startup's unproven aircraft with uncertain market demand. By any normal reading, that should have ended Boom's ambitions on the spot. Instead, Scholl made a decision that changed the entire dynamic of the program. Boom would build its own engine.
Well, now you might think, how's that even possible? I mean, even traditional engine manufacturers spend billions and take years to develop an engine. So how can a startup with barely $700 million in funding build an engine?
Well, here's the genius part. In December 2022, Boom announced a partnership with Florida Turbine Technologies, a subsidiary of Kratos Defense, to design a power plant called Symphony, a medium bypass turbofan optimized for supersonic cruise, with no afterburners, targeting Mach 1.7 over water and what Boom calls boomless cruise over land. Full-scale engine testing is planned to begin at the Colorado Air and Spaceport in 2026. But the most interesting part of this isn't the engine itself, it's what Boom decided to do with it. You see, AI is currently going through a boom of its own, and the one thing every data center in America is desperately short of right now is electricity. So Boom took Symphony's core, the hot, high-pressure heart of the engine, and turned it into a 42-megawatt natural gas turbine called Superpower, designed specifically for powering AI data centers. The plan is to use that revenue to fund the supersonic program, essentially turning it into a side hustle. And once Symphony succeeds, Boom intends to supply that same engine to other supersonic programs.
Which one, you might ask? Well, right now, the most interesting supersonic program in America isn't Boom's at all. It belongs to NASA.
Because as you know by now, the sonic boom and what it did to the people and livestock underneath it was the biggest reason that led to its eventual demise. And NASA's X-59 is built to solve exactly that. Supersonic flight with a sound on the ground no louder than a car door closing down the street. So how do you achieve that? At NASA's Langley Research Center, engineers started with a fundamental question. How do shockwaves actually behave around an aircraft? On a conventional design, those separate waves merge together on their way down and arrive as one powerful boom. So NASA's engineers set out to shape an aircraft in a way that keeps those waves separated all the way to the ground, where they land as a soft thump rather than a crack. In 2017, initial testing of a 9% scale model showed promising results. Using advanced flow visualization techniques, engineers could actually see how different shapes affected shockwave formation. And through countless computer simulations, they refined every curve and angle. Each iteration tested virtually so they could predict how subtle changes would alter the aircraft's sonic signature. The result is an aircraft with proportions so unusual that even experienced test pilots questioned the design.
As a test pilot, the first time I looked at the design, I went, really had some questions about that.
The most striking feature is the nose, which stretches an extraordinary 38 feet on an aircraft that is only 99 feet long. Roughly a third of the entire airplane is nose. But it is not there for show. The long nose helps the aircraft slice through the air so that the shock waves gradually diffuse along the body, reducing the impact of the sonic boom. But this unusual shape created a problem of its own. If you look closely at the X-59, there is no forward-facing window anywhere, because a windscreen up there would wreck the shockwave pattern the 38-foot nose spends its entire length setting up. So how exactly do you fly a jet when you cannot see what is in front of you? The solution was an ultra-high-definition camera system called the External Vision System, or XVS, which sends a live feed from two 4K cameras, stitched together with terrain data straight to the pilot's display. It is broadly similar in concept to Boom's FLVS. And don't worry, even if these cameras were to go dark, pilots can always fall back on old-school instincts and some backup visual cues, like the side windows, the canopy's limited view, and a steady stream of critical flight data from the avionics. Even with a glitch, this jet knows how to find the runway.
Perhaps the most demanding challenge of all, though, lies in physically building the thing. When you are constructing an aircraft whose entire success is determined by its shape, that shape has to be built exactly as it was drawn, down to the millimeter.
A panel sitting slightly proud, or a gap a fraction wider than the drawing calls for, can generate a shockwave the simulations never accounted for. Which means every curve and every angle has to be perfect, and no amount of computer simulation can replace actual test flights. Since there's a ban on sonic booms over American communities, there is only one place in the entire United States where this aircraft's capabilities can be properly tested: Edwards Air Force Base, a vast stretch of desert with a supersonic corridor.
And the testing campaign NASA has planned for this aircraft is unlike anything in aviation history. When you're trying to measure something as quiet as a car door closing, from an aircraft moving faster than the speed of sound, you need to rethink everything.
So NASA plans to fly the X-59 over selected American cities and survey the people underneath for their honest reaction. To prepare, engineers built a room at Langley that mimics the interior of an ordinary American house, constructed from normal residential materials and furnished like a living room, surrounded by speaker arrays that simulate supersonic overflights. The goal was simple: how much noise would people actually tolerate if supersonic jets started flying overhead again? Considering these developments, President Donald Trump signed an executive order in June of last year, directing the FAA to replace the 1973 supersonic flight ban with a performance-based noise standard, hoping to reignite the supersonic race in the US. But even if both programs succeed technically, some serious concerns remain. The first is atmospheric. When a plane is operating at, say, 33,000 feet, emissions from its engine stay in the atmosphere for like 2 or 3 days. But if you take it and make it supersonic, and you fly at 55,000 feet, the residence time, or the amount of time the pollution stays in the atmosphere, stretches to 2 or 3 years. Now, that's concerning both for climate change and for ozone depletion. The second is efficiency, because the faster you go, the less efficient travel becomes. But Boom plans to offset this with engines it claims are 25% more efficient than Concorde's, running on 100% sustainable fuel. Even with that gain, sustainable fuel, currently priced at $10 a gallon, puts the fuel cost alone at roughly $22,000 per passenger flying London to New York. Which means, for most of us, a seat on a supersonic jet is still out of reach.
So, what do you think? Will we see supersonic flight back in our skies in the near future, or is it still a distant dream? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you liked the video, hit like and subscribe.